The rain had just stopped when James Carter stepped out of the cab and looked up at the modest little restaurant nestled on the corner of Willow and 3rd Street. A warm yellow glow spilled from the windows onto the damp sidewalk, and the smell of grilled meat drifted through the open door like an invitation. His knees ached, as they always did in weather like this, and he leaned heavily on his cane. The cane wasn't just a walking aid, it was a symbol, carved from dark wood and etched with the seal of the United States Army. But it was the patches on his jacket that told the real story. The faded insignia, the campaign ribbons, and the time-worn bronze star spoke louder than any words ever could. Inside, the chatter buzzed with the soft murmur of conversations, the occasional clink of cutlery, and the sizzling sound from the open kitchen. Families gathered around booths, couples sat shoulder to shoulder sharing appetizers, and a group of college kids laughed over burgers and milkshakes. No one noticed James at first, which suited him just fine. He had learned to fade into the background over the years. It was easier that way. But as he stepped over the threshold, the door's bell chimed sharply, and a few heads turned. A momentary lull rippled through the room, not loud, but just enough that he felt it in his chest. It was a familiar silence, that subtle shift in atmosphere, like the air itself grew still when people tried to figure out what to make of an old black man in army fatigues walking into a place like this alone. Then, she appeared, a young waitress with honey blonde hair pulled into a bun and bright blue eyes. Her name tag read Emily, written in curly script. She approached with a confident stride and a smile that didn't feel like it was practiced for tips. It felt real. "Window seat or booth, sir?" she asked, her voice gentle but clear, like she meant every word. James blinked. For a moment, he was caught off guard, not by her question, but by the way she said sir, like it mattered. Like he mattered. "Booth," he said after a pause. "Please, right this way." As she led him across the dining room, James could feel a few eyes on his back, lingering glances that tried to make sense of him. But Emily didn't seem to notice, or maybe she just didn't care. She gestured to a booth near the window. "Here, okay." He nodded and lowered himself into the seat with a soft grunt. His back cracked slightly as he shifted into position. Emily handed him a menu. "Can I get you something to drink while you look over the options?" "Water," he replied. "Just water. I'll be right back." She returned quickly with a chilled glass and a basket of warm rolls. He studied the menu, though he already knew what he wanted. He'd always had a soft spot for a good steak, cooked medium well, with mashed potatoes and brown gravy. It reminded him of home. Of Sundays at his mother's table. Of the rare peace that existed between deployments. Emily returned a few minutes later, pad in hand. "Ready?" "Yes," he said, folding the menu. "Steak, medium well. Mashed potatoes. Gravy if you've got it." "Got it," she said with a smile, jotting it down. "Coming right up." She turned to leave, but before she did, she leaned down as if she were adjusting the water glass. James watched curiously as she slipped something beneath the edge of his plate. It was small, folded, and inconspicuous, just a square of white paper. She didn't say anything, didn't even look at him directly. Then she straightened and walked away without another word. James stared at the plate for a moment, heart beginning to thump in his chest. His fingers twitched slightly before he reached out and pulled the folded note toward him. He opened it slowly, cautiously, unsure of what he was about to read. There, written in neat, deliberate handwriting, were the words. "Greater than, you're the reason my father came home alive. I know your name. Please don't leave before I talk to you, Emily." He froze. The blood drained from his face. His hand clutched the note tightly, the paper crinkling slightly in his grip. He read it again. Then a third time. He looked up at her. She was at another table now, refilling coffee and laughing politely at a customer's joke. But there was a subtle stiffness to her smile now. Like she knew what she had just done. Like she was waiting. James leaned back in the booth, staring down at the note. His mind began to spin. How could she know his name? He hadn't been recognized in years. Not by face. And certainly not in a place like this. Most people didn't ask about the patches on his jacket. They didn't care. They just saw an old man and maybe, if they noticed the uniform, muttered a passing, "Thank you for your service," without meaning it. But this was different. She said he brought her father home. He tried to do the math in his head. If she was in her 20s, her father would have served when? Iraq, Afghanistan. No, wait, she said, came home alive. And she knew James's name. His throat tightened. It had to be from Vietnam. He searched his memories, wading through images and names buried under decades of trauma and silence. He'd saved a lot of men. Or tried to. He remembered dragging wounded bodies through rice paddies, bullets zipping overhead, choppers kicking up dust and blood. He remembered bandaging limbs, screaming over the noise, feeling the heat of napalm falling nearby. But he couldn't place a name. Not yet. Still, something inside him stirred. Something old. Something sacred. His eyes burned. He folded the note carefully and tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket. Then he sat still, staring out the window as the rain started again, tapping softly against the glass like a heartbeat. Emily returned again, setting down his plate gently. Steak medium well, mashed potatoes, extra gravy. Thank you, he said quietly, locking eyes with her for the first time. She looked at him with a vulnerability he hadn't expected. She opened her mouth, as if to say something more, but stopped. Instead, she gave him a tight smile and walked away. James picked up his fork and knife but didn't start eating. His appetite had vanished, replaced by a growing pressure in his chest. Who was her father? What had she been told? He looked again at Emily as she moved gracefully between tables, now stealing glances at him when she thought he wasn't watching. Something about her eyes reminded him of someone. And deep down, he had a feeling that tonight would change something in him. That perhaps, after all these years, something lost had found its way back. James sat with the steak cooling in front of him, untouched, as if it were just another piece of the moment rather than a meal. The note still weighed heavily in his jacket pocket, though its weight had nothing to do with paper. It felt like a bridge between two lifetimes, one he had lived, and one that had been shaped by his actions without him ever knowing. He watched Emily move across the floor, graceful but tense, like a dancer performing under pressure. She was smiling at other tables, laughing even, but her eyes kept darting back to him. Not in fear, not even in worry. It was something deeper, urgency, perhaps. Maybe even gratitude she didn't know how to express. He lifted his water glass to his lips but barely took a sip. His hands, so steady on the battlefield, trembled now. Not from fear or weakness, but from the flood of emotion he hadn't let in for years. The truth was, James Carter didn't talk about the war. Not to neighbors, not to strangers, not even to the VA counselor who called twice a year. There were things in his past that stayed buried, packed down deep beneath medals and folded flags. But tonight, something was rising. When Emily finally approached his table again, she carried the check in her hand, but she didn't set it down. Instead, she looked around briefly, making sure no one was watching, and then slid into the booth across from him. It was an act that broke every restaurant rule in the book. But James said nothing. He just stared at her, waiting. She didn't speak right away. Her hands twisted the edge of her apron. She was breathing fast, like she'd been holding this moment inside for too long. I hope that wasn't too forward, she began, voice barely above a whisper. The note, I mean. James shook his head slowly. No, just, unexpected. There was a long pause before she said the next part. You saved my father's life. He exhaled slowly, his gaze locking with hers. You said that, but I don't know who your father is. She nodded. You wouldn't. He told me about you, but he didn't know if you were still alive. His name was Mark Henley. Private First Class. Army. Vietnam. The name was like a distant bell, muffled at first, then growing clearer as it echoed through the years. Mark Henley. James looked away, eyes narrowing as he sifted through 1,000 images in his memory. Jungle vines, mud-covered boots, sweat stinging his eyes, the sharp staccato of gunfire. And then, he saw it. A young white kid, barely shaving age, hit in the leg during an ambush near Pleiku. Crying out, terrified, left behind in the panic. I remember, James whispered. Henley. We were under fire. I pulled him out of the creek bed. He was bleeding bad, and the medic wasn't close enough. I tied off his leg with my belt. I thought, he trailed off, shaking his head. I thought he didn't make it. Emily smiled, eyes glistening. He did. He made it because of you. He was in the hospital for a while, sure, but he walked again. Married my mom, raised 3 kids. And he never stopped talking about the man who carried him to that evac chopper. James's hands tightened around his glass. He never said much about the war, she went on, her voice softer now. But that part, your part, he told with pride. He called you, the one who refused to leave me. A silence settled between them, thick with meaning. James didn't know how to respond. He had spent years wondering if anything he'd done over there mattered. Whether the lives he tried to save were ever enough to balance the ones he couldn't. And now, sitting across from a woman who wouldn't exist if he hadn't made that decision under fire, he felt something crack open inside him. "He passed away last year," Emily said quietly. "Heart condition. But before he died, he made me promise something. He said if I ever came across someone named James Carter, a tall, black soldier from Georgia who fought in Pleiku, I had to say thank you." James swallowed hard. "You did more than that." There was a pause. She looked at him with fresh eyes, not as a customer, but as something closer to family. "He always regretted that he never got to say it himself," she added. "He wanted to write, but he didn't know how to find you." James gave a bitter smile. "Most people didn't try, or didn't care. We didn't exactly come home to parades." Emily nodded solemnly. "He told me about that too. How you were treated. It made him so angry. Said it was one of the biggest injustices of his life, that the man who saved him came back to a country that didn't want to look him in the eye." James's eyes clouded. He remembered the stares, the slurs, the silence. Coming home in a uniform that had no welcome. He remembered applying for jobs and being told he was too militant. He remembered the looks from his own neighbors, people he'd fought to protect. "That's why I needed to talk to you," Emily said, voice breaking. "Because you deserve to know that you made a difference. You still do." She reached into her apron and pulled out a folded photo. She slid it across the table. James picked it up, hands shaking. It was a black and white picture, creased at the edges. In it, a young man in a hospital gown held a baby wrapped in a soft blanket. The man's smile was wide, eyes filled with a joy that seemed impossible after war. "That's him," Emily said. "And that's me." James stared at the photo, overcome. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he placed it carefully on the table and looked up at her. "I never thought I'd see something like this," he said, voice raw. "Never thought I'd get closure." Emily reached across the table and gently took his hand. It was a small gesture, but it carried the weight of generations. "You gave me a father," she said. "You gave my brothers someone to look up to. My mom someone to grow old with. We owe you everything." The restaurant around them faded into the background, the noise, the people, the clatter. None of it mattered. For the first time in years, James felt seen. Not just as a veteran. Not just as an old man with a cane. But as a man whose sacrifice had rippled through time, shaping lives he'd never even imagined. He cleared his throat, trying to steady himself. "Thank you," he said softly. "For finding me. For this moment." Emily nodded, eyes brimming with emotion. "Can I ask something else?" "Anything. Would you come to our house this weekend? We're having a family dinner. My mom would want to meet you. So would my brothers. We tell your story all the time, but it'd mean the world to meet the man behind it." James hesitated. He hadn't been to a real family dinner in years. He'd spent so many holidays alone, convinced that was just how life had turned out for him. But now, here was a door being opened. A second chance. He nodded slowly. "I'd like that." Emily smiled, and for the first time that night, the tightness in her expression melted into genuine joy. "You have no idea what this means," she whispered. James chuckled softly. "No, I think maybe I do." They sat in silence for a moment longer, hands still clasped. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. And for the first time in a very long time, James Carter felt like he was finally home.